Welcome to Dr. Creepen's dungeon. Well, they say there's no such thing as a bad pizza. What a shame it can't be said for the pizza delivery experience, as we will see in tonight's stories. Later on, we have volumes 1, 2, and 3 of the Pizza Delivery Diaries. But before that, we begin with an anonymous story, the one about the pizza guy. Now, as ever before we begin, a word of caution. Tonight's stories may contain strong language, as well as descriptions of violence and horrific imagery. If that sounds like your kind of thing, then let's begin. If you really want to hear about it, here's what happened. It was a long time ago, and I was working at a local pizza joint named Pizza. I remember clock watching, waiting for midnight to strike so I could get the hell out of there. I didn't have any plans. I just wanted to go home and watch a movie, maybe smoke a joint before going to sleep. I hadn't been able to fall asleep last night. I was tired and pissy. I remember hoping that the phone wouldn't ring, because that was exactly how it went in the food service industry. People called 5 minutes before closing time, expecting to get good service. Yeah, right. Pizza. What the hell kind of name was that? The better question was, why had I applied there for a job in the first place? I was 25 years old, for starters. Most people my age I'm paying my way through school to fall back on as an excuse. But me? Shit. All I could say was, it's all I'm qualified for because I couldn't decide on a major when I was younger. And now that I'm older and wiser, I realize that everything else is a fucking waste of time. Whatever. Apathy and we go pretty much hand in hand. 14 minutes until I could get out. God, I hated the customers, or guests, as the management wanted us to call them. Yeah, guests my ass. Being a guest required just a little bit of dignity, so the assholes that waddled into Pizza would be referred to as customers. I didn't work the front counter too much. I'm not entirely sure which end of the stick I was getting, because I usually clocked in as a delivery driver. Paul, the owner of Pizza, gave me $50 extra a week to pay for gas, which was more than enough. Paul was okay. Definitely not my favorite person. He had his moments of pleasantness, though. Tonight wasn't one of those nights. He had a stick up his ass for some reason or another, and it had been there since we'd walked in the front door. I could see it on his face, in his eyes behind his glasses. I didn't know. I'd arrived at work pleasantly stoned, and had stayed that way until now. I didn't really care why old Paulie was mad, nor did I care if he was going to feel better. Not with 12 minutes left on the clock. Now, you can't just close the goddamn doors a few minutes early, can you? I thought, rolling my eyes as I watched the second hand tick its way around the clock. Paul was one of those bosses. The kind that would leave his front doors open for another 10 or 20 minutes past close. And I wondered why the turnover rate was so high. When you pander to the customers and not the employees, things are bound to go wrong. I sighed and reached into my back pocket to retrieve my cell phone. That was when the phone on the counter behind me rang for the first time in 2.5 hours. Oh, fuck, I groaned, rolling my head back. Subtlety and we kind of clash. I was pissed. It was 10 minutes until close. Asshole, I muttered, as I picked up the phone and put the receiver to my ear. Thanks for calling Pizza. This is Ben speaking, I said, turning my head slightly to look towards the office, where Paul was busy with paperwork. "How may I assist you this evening?" "Hey, I'm sorry to be calling so late," the guy on the other end said quickly. I immediately felt a little bad. He sounded polite, albeit a little anxious, a little uptight. "Are you still delivering?" "You bet," I said. "Oh, good, the guy said. "Thanks. Would it be possible to put in an order for 6 large cheese pizzas, extra cheese?" "You bet. What else can I get you?" "That's it, thanks." "Address, sir?" 1388 Alpine Drive, the big place, the guy said. "Name?" There was a hesitation. The absolute smallest one that probably wouldn't have been noticeable, but I was in a floor-picking mood. It didn't bother me. Not then. "Robert. My name is Robert." "Be about 25-30 minutes, I told him. He thanked me again and hung up as I punched the order into my terminal. I heard Paul exclaim in the back. "God damn it," he cried. 6 goddamn pizzas? It's almost midnight." "You could have closed early," I muttered under my breath. Then, with a sigh to Paul, "Right there with you, boss." The pizzas took 15 minutes to make. Paul told me to head home after the delivery. He didn't feel like waiting around for me. I was just fine with that. I didn't even know where Alpine Drive was until I punched it into Google Maps at 12:15. I sat down in my Mazda and started the engine, waiting for the app to load. "You should reach your destination by 12:40, Google told me. I tilted my head back against the seat and let out a groan. Should reach my destination by 12:40. Yeah, that was just great. "Thanks, Google," I said. I kind of wish it would say, "You're welcome, Ben," or something cool like that. But then again, I don't know how comfortable I am with being on a first-name basis with a Samsung. The order total was over $70, though, including the delivery charge. That meant an extra $10 or $20 in my wallet, which was fine by me. Hopefully they weren't assholes who didn't tip. I shifted into gear and started heading for Alpine Drive. I wish we had a delivery zone that was smaller than 30 miles. Whatever. It could have been worse. I don't know how stoned I was by the time Google announced that I would reach my destination in 3 minutes. I'd taken Highway 54 all the way south, and the drive had been quick and uneventful. I played Alkaline Trio and Blink-182 on the way because some things never get old, no matter how old you are. I wasn't really familiar with the area, and I was glad as hell to have GPS. After a while, the endless fields on either side of the highway had slowly turned to black, looming forests. The trees were black shapes against the eternally dark sky, lit only by the cast of my headlights. I'm pretty sure that was the first and last time I was that far south on 54. I'm all alone out here. That was true and false at the same time. I'd passed 3 or 4 houses on the way. I saw them because of the lights, glowing faintly in the dark. I remember thinking it was a 10 or 15-minute gap between seeing each house, making me wonder just how many miles the residents were from each other. It was an eerie thought, the nearest neighbor being 5 or 6 miles away. My ever-wild imagination conjured up an image. I was dead in a bathtub, the shower head running over my naked and bloody corpse. I'd fallen down, hit my head, and died because there was no one around to report me missing. I shook my head and continued driving until I was directed to take a right on Carpenter Hooper Road. I ended up turning onto a gravel road. I sighed, passing a bullet-riddled speed limit sign saying it was 55 through here. Were they serious? Who the hell went 55 miles an hour on an unpaved road? I coasted at a steady 40, keeping my eyes peeled for wildlife and random farm machinery. I wasn't worried about other cars because it had been 15 minutes since I'd seen one. Might have been longer. Yes. All alone. It was only 5 or so minutes until I reached the end of what looked like a driveway. The nav told me that I would reach my destination after I turned right. I obliged and continued up the driveway. I was searching for the house and couldn't find it. The map said that the house was on the left side of the road, but it wasn't. You have reached your destination. No, I haven't, I said impatiently. There was nothing but trees on my left, so thickly knotted together that it looked impossible to walk through, let alone inhabit a home with modern conveniences here. I slowed down a little bit, and the bright beam of what could only be a porch light flared up in my rear-view mirror on the right side of the road. Google, you asshole. It took me a minute to do a successful 180, but I eventually started up the driveway. The driveway was paved, and a few moments after I pulled onto it, I was aware that my tires were no longer crunching gravel. It had gotten very quiet, and this, for whatever reason, was really unnerving. I rounded a bend, and beyond the pine trees surrounding me was the house. Whatever light I'd seen was off now, and the place was totally dark. The driveway looped around in front of the house. I slowed to a stop and parked, leaving the engine running out of habit. People keep telling me that my car is going to get stolen. Please, steal my Mazda. Did everyone leave? Maybe I'd gotten the wrong address, or typed in the wrong one or something. The GPS had already been wrong once. No, the address next to the door was the same as what I'd typed in. I shrugged it off because it wasn't that big of a deal. It wasn't a big deal then anyway, because that's how things go. The characters in the horror movie make those stupid decisions because going upstairs to investigate that strange noise is what most people would likely do. It's part logic because floorboards like to creak randomly and things fall over all the time. It's a security thing though. We, as human beings, have to be certain that we're safe. The idea of an intruder was a slimy thought. The word intruder even had a sinister feel to it. Hey, Plato, your philosophies and anecdotes are adorable, but your pizzas are going to get cold, and you're going to be Munsoned here in bumfuck. I was tired. My mind tends to wander when I'm tired. Slap happy, I think it's called. I got out of the car and stood up straight, stretching and listening for a moment to hear my joints crackle. I let out a long breath and walked to the trunk to retrieve the pizzas, because that's just how much I care about my job and its valued customers that call just before close. I took another glance at the dark house and rolled my eyes. This was probably a prank call. I was willing to bet a testicle that a bunch of assholes had picked a random address and sent me to it. They were probably all having a laugh right now. I'm not trying to be over-emotional, but that honestly hurt my feelings. What a fucking waste of time. I need a new job. The pizzas were all in an insulated bag, and I carried it lightly on my fingertips. I'd waited tables for God knows how long before this, and I'd developed a great set of forearms and really strong fingers because of how often I'd hold heavy trays and plates. I balanced the bag without thought as I made my way around the car and up the driveway, towards the front porch. The sound of my shoes crunching over loose gravel and dead leaves was loud. and I felt isolated, 1,000 miles from nowhere. There was no wind. The woods around me were quiet, and the only light other than the moonlight was the glow of my headlights. I don't know why I looked up at the second floor as I walked across the yard. I was lost in thought, noting that the grass was long and in need of a trim. It was just a quick glance up that led to an attempt at looking forward again. I looked up again in a flash. I thought I'd seen the silhouette of a man in one of the upstairs windows, but I marked it off as being a trick of the light. I don't know if I want to meet the owners of a place this far out in the boonies. The thought gave me goosebumps that I tried to ignore. I mounted the porch steps and walked across it, thudding and creaking across the floorboards. I noticed there was no doorbell, and the curtains were drawn. I didn't give it a second thought as I knocked on the door in the tune of the theme from Star Wars. My roots at work had taken me to some really shitty places. This house looked fine, a little unkempt, but far from gentrified. I stepped back from the door a little bit and waited for someone to answer, but 30 seconds went by, and then a minute. I knocked again, this time just 3 booming knuckle raps that were loud and clear. Oh, fuck, I muttered as I realized that no one really was home after all. What a fucking waste of time. I turned around to get back to the car and gave the house a fleeting glance as I bounced down the steps. I stopped when I saw one of the curtains on the first floor fall back into place, as if someone had been standing there. "Hey," I called. "Hey, dude, I've got a bunch of pizzas for you." I walked up the steps again. I was miffed, surprised, and confused all at once, because I was sure the house had been empty. Why the hell were all the lights off? That was the big one, the question I really wanted to know. I wondered if it was a surprise party, but shook it off. If Robert, or Stan, or whatever his name was, didn't answer the door this time, I was going to drive my ass home and throw each of those damn pizzas out the window along the way. I knocked on the front door again. "Come on, man," I said under my breath. I then said loudly, "Pizza guy." Then quietly, "Fucking waiting for you." I gave it a full minute and turned around to leave, but as I did, the sound of footsteps inside the house made me stop. I turned around again and was about to knock when I heard someone say, "Hey, sorry." It was a man's voice, low and pleasant, like a radio talk show host, but it scared the hell out of me anyway. I wondered why he was talking to me through the door instead of just opening it. "That's totally fine," I replied, uncertainly. "You Richie?" There was the slightest pause before he said, "It's Robert." The tone in his voice, as he emphasized his name, was a little weird, like he forgot it. I didn't think too much of it, mostly because he'd already scared the hell out of me, but because customers I served were always strange, and sometimes liked to use fake names when ordering a pizza, like Dale Gribble on King of the Hill. I don't know why, and I don't question why people are the way they are. You ordered the 6 large cheeses?" I felt ridiculous, talking to this guy through the door, and a little uncertain. I was ready to run at any moment, in case things went south with the guy behind the door. Sirens weren't going off inside. The guy instantly struck a weird chord with me, but not a threatening one. "Yes, I did. Look, I know this is a weird question, but could you come around to the back door and meet me on the patio?" I didn't answer right away, and maybe that's why he added, "This door is all fucked up. I was waiting for you in the kitchen. I thought I mentioned that on the phone." All I could really say was, oh, yeah, okay. Had he told me that? I didn't think so, but I couldn't remember. I'd been pissed about how late it was and everything, but the order itself had vacated my mind. I was a little unsettled by how quickly he'd added that the door was busted. Now, this is usually where most people would say, I'd get the fuck out of there. And I probably would have until I realized that Paul would probably charge me the full fare for those lost pizzas. I didn't feel like paying for them. So, I walked down the steps again and started heading for the backyard. Once again I heard the loud crunching of gravel beneath my feet as I balanced the pizzas on my fingers. The crescent moon above me was my only source of light, and it was no surprise that I nearly tripped over a rock the size of a softball that was hidden in the dark. I stumbled and almost fell, carefully righting the pizzas in my left hand. I heard something crunch behind me. I whirled around, and as I did, I caught a glimpse of somebody peering at me from around the corner of the house. He must have seen me notice him, because he quickly withdrew and disappeared from sight. I started backing up, keeping my eyes on that spot. I had an unsettling thought. There had been someone behind me, walking in step with me to avoid detection until I tripped and threw him off. I was still walking backwards, but I was on the verge of walking forward and getting the hell out of Dodge when I realized just how scared I was. I didn't want to go back the way I came, back to where I'd seen the figure. I couldn't help but think he was waiting right around the corner and ready to grab me as I passed by. But heading to the back door seemed like an equally bad idea. Oh, I wished I'd never gotten out of the car. I hadn't stopped moving and waltzed right into the backyard. As I passed through the gate, a set of motion-activated lights mounted above the back door turned on. I dropped the pizzas in shock when the bright halogen lights washed over me and illuminated most of the backyard. I turned around wildly, expecting to see somebody standing behind me. To my surprise, though, I didn't see anything but a fenced-in backyard that was flush against the woods. The grass was ankle-high and laced with various weeds, but I didn't pay much attention to it. The yard was huge, and the guy probably didn't have time to mow it. I was collecting the pizzas from the ground when I heard someone say, "Hey, buddy." I turned around quickly and faced a middle-aged man. He was standing on the back porch with both of his hands held open at waist level in an unintimidating gesture. He looked around a little wildly and gave me a nervous smile as I jumped to my feet. "Sorry, I didn't mean to scare you," he said, smiling sheepishly. "Oh, it's just a heart attack," I told him, shifting the pizzas around so they were evenly stacked. "I'm really sorry if it's super creepy here right now," he said, in a tone that made me feel totally embarrassed. "I literally just lost power a few minutes ago. I don't know if we blew a fuse or if the generator blew or I don't even know." He ran his hands through his hair, shaking his head. "Ugh, and to top it off, some asshole tried to rob my place the other night and fucking busted the front door." He shook his head again and lowered his hands back to his sides. "I'm sorry," he said. "It's been a really shitty night, you know." "Yeah," I said, nodding. I felt really stupid. The man in front of me looked normal. He talked clearly and, again, pleasantly. He was even wearing a light blue shirt, khakis, and some kind of sweater tied around his neck. He looked like a rich snob the way he was dressed, to be honest. Hell, his hair was even combed over douchebag style, and he struck me as the kind of guy who had never worked anywhere near fast food. Usually this meant a lack of courtesy towards people like me, calling at such a late hour and such. I wasn't quite at ease, but I never am on deliveries. People are capable of dark, dark things. A lot of the time we do those things for money. I maybe had $60 on me, but people have been slashed to ribbons for much less. People have been killed for no reason at all. I know the feeling, I said as I squatted down to pick up the pizzas. I'm sorry, but he cut me off with a wave of his hand, then gestured his thumb at the motion light. This light would get me on an episode of Fear Thy Neighbor, if I had neighbors. It scares the shit out of me every time a deer walks through the yard. I got the fence, but they don't care. I slowly approached the man, who slowly approached me. It's like we were afraid of each other, or maybe just embarrassed of ourselves. He was actually holding the cash in his hand when I unzipped the bag and handed him the pizzas. He handed me 2 bills, both hundreds. Oh man, I don't have that much change on me. No, Robert said, shaking his head and taking the pizzas. That's your tip for coming way the hell out of here so late. I know you guys were about to close. For $100 and something tip, I said. Oh, it's fine, man, really. All I was going to do was go home and watch TV until I fell asleep. It was the truth, but I tried my best to make it sound like it was something I didn't want to do. The tip threw me way the hell off. I'd been expecting anywhere between $1 and $20. This guy was loaded. Well, I appreciate it anyway, the guy said. Thanks. He'd been maintaining eye contact with me the whole time in a non-threatening way, more like a salesman than anything. He suddenly broke it and stared past me, into the woods beyond the backyard. There was a man standing on our side of the fence, barely visible in the darkness. I don't know why I whispered, "Oh, shit." But Robert looked at me, concerned, and then back at the woods. "Did he talk to you?" he demanded angrily. "Son of a bitch has been scaring the shit out of us." The man in the woods nimbly hopped over the fence and proceeded our way in a slow and steady gait. Robert shouted, "Hey!" in an angry tone and leapt off the porch. He shoulder-checked me as he ran past towards the fence. "I told you to get the hell off my property." I stuffed the money in my pocket and started to follow him for whatever reason. He was walking fast, intent on getting to the man, judging by the pace. He was halfway across the yard when the gunshot rang out. He stopped in his tracks and did a 180, sprinting back towards the house with his hands over his head. "Get inside! Get inside!" he shouted, waving wildly at me. Everything happened fast. I was still wondering who the hell the guy in the backyard was when the gun fired. Robert grabbed me by the collar as he ran up the stairs, dragging me up and into the house with him. He slammed the door behind us and fiercely whispered, "Get down," before locking it. He forced me into a squatting position, and we crab-crawled our way across a dark kitchen. He led me to a door and opened it. It was a black rectangle, absolutely dark. I was thinking that it led to a basement or something when Robert ushered me over the threshold and on to the top step. I stumbled over my own feet and nearly lost my balance, seizing a hold on the banister to stop me from falling down the stairs. I looked back and saw that Robert was now standing up straight. We locked eyes for a brief moment. His face was expressionless as he brought his leg back and kicked me in the abdomen, hard enough to send me flying back into the blackness behind me. I didn't even have time to react, let alone time to scream. There was a moment when I sailed weightlessly in mid-air before I crashed against the angles of the wooden steps on my back. I heard wood splinter, and in an awful flare-up of pain, I felt something in my upper back crunch wetly behind my skin. I bumped down the last 8 or 9 steps in a violent series of somersaults, coming to an abrupt stop as I crashed shoulder first against the stone wall at the bottom of the stairs, landing on my chest. I opened my eyes and took a shuddering breath in. I'd landed on a dirt floor, and a plume of dust had shot up when I'd crash-landed. It flooded my nostrils and my throat, and I immediately started coughing, which hurt my entire body. When I stopped coughing, I cautiously wiggled my toes and made sure I wasn't paralyzed from the violent fall. The first thing I saw was a stone-carved table that could have only been an altar. There were dozens of unlit red candles on it and around it. The table was spotted with blood. I was still trying to process everything that had just happened to me. It had been less than a minute since I'd walked into the backyard. I understood that I'd been tricked and ambushed. I was trying to piece together what the table was for, and why there was blood on it. I thought I knew, but wouldn't let the thought fully form in my head. I heard some footsteps shuffling around upstairs as I slowly got to my feet. I was numb as I stood up straight, wondering why the coffin had hurt so badly. I heard joints crack and pop, but barely felt them as I began to look around the dirt room, drawn in and held wrapped by the altar in the middle. I wouldn't allow myself to think about what the altar was for. I tore my gaze away and looked at the floor for a few moments, before I felt the muscles in my jaw give away, before it dropped open at the sight of hundreds and hundreds of footprints on the floor. Almost all of them were very small. Children's footprints. I let out a shuddering gasp, and that was when I saw that Robert had made his way down the stairs and was standing in the spot where I'd landed. "It doesn't hurt," he said, grimacing apologetically as he revealed the carving knife in his hand. I really wish there was another way. One that wasn't so messy. But what can you do, right? I couldn't say anything. I wish I could say I was forming some genius plan, but I was drawing a blank. I'd broken something when I fell, because breathing hurt pretty bad, and standing up straight was worse. Seeing the knife scared me to a point that I not only began a series of high-pitched moans, I also pissed myself. A stream of hot piss ran down my thighs and puddled around my chucks. I held out both hands, my eyes darting right and left as I desperately searched for an escape route. I was fucked. Robert was maybe 6 feet away and slowly closing in. There was the chance of me running to the right or left and trying to get around him, but I didn't think I would be fast enough. I smoked too much for starters, and the fall down the stairs took care of the rest. I didn't want to die. I didn't have much to live for, not really. But that didn't mean my life was worthless. I thought I was a pretty nice guy. I got pissed every so often, but who didn't? I wasn't really hero material, but I wasn't at the villain end of the spectrum either. I helped people when I could. I didn't bother returning clothes I just bought and decided they weren't for me. I donated them to Goodwill because someone less fortunate could enjoy them. I held the door open for people and said, "May I please?" and "Thank you." Robert stopped, 3 or 4 feet away. He smiled at me, and it was genuine, because I saw it touch his eyes. Wow, a smile had never made my blood run that cold. "It doesn't hurt, Ben," he said, in a reassuring tone, even going so far as to raise his free hand in another non-threatening gesture. "Trust me, this whole thing is beyond your understanding, and mine. The magnitude, you'll never understand, and neither will I. All I can say is that you're donating your life to a beautiful thing, Ben. So just lay still and close those baby blue eyes of yours." I don't know why, but I started to get pissed right then. The fear was still there, but it was different somehow, in a way I can't really describe. I hadn't done a fucking thing. All I'd done was go to work. "Go to hell," I hissed, and spat at him as hard as my lungs would allow. Bloody saliva hit his face and ran down his cheeks. It ran over his lips, and he slowly licked it away. For no reason, the altar caught my eye again, mostly the sharp corners. He started walking again, and I shifted left along the wall until I was near the corner. Robert's body tensed, and he lashed out with his free hand to grab me. He seized the collar of my shirt and pulled me closer as he brought the knife down, aiming for my chest. I grabbed him by the forearm and shoulder-charged him at the same time. We stumbled backwards together until Robert's lower back roughly bumped into the corner of the stone altar. "Fuck!" he screamed, craning his head back. I heard the knife clatter on the altar, and Robert grabbed the sides of my head, his thumb searching for my eyes and tearing the skin just above my eyebrows. I went back with his momentum and then decided to go forward again, shoving him into the corner of the altar once more. He let out a pained scream as the stone corner dug into his tailbone this time. He lurched forward, reaching behind him to feel his back. I charged him then. I don't know where the strength came from, but I don't really want to know. Never question a good thing. I sure as hell don't anymore. His back collided with the altar, and again he let out another pained shout before he unexpectedly stepped forward and brought his knee into my chest. I don't think I'll ever feel pain like that again. I saw stars and screamed so loudly I saw red and black spots glittering in front of the stars. I was holding my chest and abdomen with both hands, barely able to breathe, when I saw Robert closing in on me, taking long and purposeful strides. I didn't think as I lowered my head and charged him with a headbutt with the last bit of strength I had. The top of my head slammed into his abdomen. I heard the wind rush out of his lungs, and he flew back from the impact. There was a low series of scrapes as his shoes lost their grip on the dirt floor. He lost his balance and fell back, shooting both arms out to steady himself, but failing. He met the corner of the stone altar with a wet crack, and a large spray of blood hit me in the face from a few feet away. I cried out and frantically started wiping my eyes with my forearm. My vision cleared and I saw Robert, leaning up against the side of the altar. A hairy smear of blood led from the sharp corner to where his head was now. His eyes were bugging out, and his mouth was hanging open. There was a growing pool of blood around him. Was he dead? He had to be. His head had just gotten split open like an egg. I quickly stepped past him, making my way for the stairs. "You're gonna fucking die down here," Robert crooned wetly in a sing-song voice, unseen from the other side of the altar. I heard more scraping and knew that he was starting to get to his feet. I saw one of his bloody hands reach up and grip the edge of the altar. I didn't stick around to see anything else. I gripped the railing with both hands and hauled myself up the stairs as best I could, trying to look in every direction at once. I could hear Robert shuffling around behind me, chuckling and panting wetly. I reached the top of the stairs and looked around at a moonlit kitchen before hauling ass to the back door. The kitchen was empty, save a half-full bottle of Cabernet on the counter, with 5 empty wine glasses around it. A brief glimpse into the living room told me that nobody lived here, but it was the countless amounts of spiderwebs in the corners of the ceiling that told me that nobody had lived here for a long, long time. I heard Robert clunk on one of the stairs, calling my name. I reached for the knob on the back door and... boom! The window on the door shattered into 100 pieces as a bullet tore through them. I whirled around and saw a man standing in the hallway between the kitchen and the living room, holding a hunting rifle in his hands. I was almost sure that it was the same man from the backyard. He jacked another round in and leveled it at my chest. I held both hands out, screaming, Wait, no, wait, please, God, no!" The man's eyes locked with mine, before he abruptly dropped his rifle and gasped inward one time, before he exploded. I stared at the spot where he'd been standing 2 seconds ago, and at the rifle on the ground. I was half thinking that he'd been wearing some type of bomb, but there'd been no sound, except the briefest sound of pulverizing bone and ripping flesh. There was blood everywhere now, covering the walls and my body. I was still standing, frozen in place, with one hand on the doorknob, when Robert appeared in the basement doorway. One of his eyes was crooked, looking in every direction, while one was locked on me and full of anger. He stayed silent as he started to walk towards me, and I don't think he would have known anything was wrong if he hadn't tripped over the dropped rifle. He stumbled briefly and looked down, revealing the gaping hole in the back of his head. I could see his brain in the glimmer of the moonlight, silver grey and pulsating. He righted himself and looked down at the rifle for a moment. "What? Where did he—" Robert sputtered and then looked back at me. "You..." He trailed off and stared at me intently, or at least I thought he was looking at me. He was looking past me, almost the same as he'd looked past me a few minutes ago. I jerkily turned my head and saw what he was looking at. There were 3 yellow jackets on the door behind me, lazily crawling on the wood. I was prepared to move away when they flickered their wings and took off into the air. They flew into the darkness and were gone. "Oh, no," Robert whispered, covering his face with both hands. "Oh, no." "What is that?" I asked quietly, as the floor began to vibrate slightly. I was no longer afraid of Robert or whoever else was with him. The look of terror on his face told me that I should probably be afraid of whatever he was afraid of too. "Why couldn't you just go to sleep?" Robert whimpered, and then both of his eyes exploded. Blood splattered on my chest, and I turned the knob, pulling the door open as all hell broke loose at 1388 Alpine Drive. Hornets flew out of Robert's bloody eye sockets, and he screamed shrilly, reaching up to cap them off. The drain in the kitchen sink made a loud growl before sending out an endless surge of shit. I'm sure it was shit, that splattered against the ceiling hard enough to make a hole. The oven exploded in a fireball, and I saw 4 figures, all the size of children, and all burning like wildfire, emerge. I heard the sound of children crying, but also the sound of them laughing too. Robert turned in their direction, still screaming and trying to cover his eyes. He held out one hand in the children's direction. One of them reached out and took it, burning his fingers off of his hand with an audible sizzle. I was still gripping the doorknob tightly, but I looked down when I crushed it in my hand. I was now holding an eye the size of a tennis ball in my right hand. It oozed blood and yellow fluid between my fingers. I cried out and threw it into the kitchen as the walls began to split. People shapes, wrapped in newspaper and bedsheets, emerged from the walls, most of them missing arms or heads. They briefly paused to look at me, or at least turned in my direction. I stared right back. They all moaned in unison before turning around and advancing on Robert as well. I heard a series of cracks and looked in the hallway towards the living room and saw something bulging beneath the floor, tearing it up as it made its way into the kitchen, sending shards of wood into the air. It was growling. He was screaming my name as it approached him. The floorboard swelled, splintered, and an unearthly black mass began to emerge. I couldn't take any more, and the fear broke. I threw myself onto the back porch, pulling the door closed behind me with a loud slam. I stumbled into the railing, and Robert's screams stopped, but the growling continued. "Lights out, Bobby," I whispered, as I felt my way along the railing and vaulted down the stairs. I could hear whines and moans now, amidst growls and snarls. I ran along the side of the house as fast as I could. There was no pain. My only thought now was my own fucking survival. The car was 10 yards away, when the windows I ran past began to shatter outward like small bombs were going off inside. I cried out with each one and covered my head, never taking my eyes off of the car. The growling grew louder and louder, overlapped with weeps and moans and shrieks of damnation. "Ben, stay with me. Ben, it's okay. Don't be afraid, Ben. Your father's with us, Ben. It doesn't hurt, Ben." I slammed into the side of the Honda with a cry of pain and patted my pockets for my keys. They weren't there. I madly felt myself up and down to find them, trying to keep my eyes on the house. The window panes began to light up a deep red, and a low-frequency humming seemed ever present in my ears. That was when I realized I'd never killed the engine, that I'd left the damn car running the whole time, because I thought it'd only be a minute or two. "Fucking shit!" I cried incoherently, albeit joyously, as I pulled the door open and dove inside, smacking the lock button down hard enough to crack the plastic. I didn't bother with the seatbelt. I mashed the brake and reached for the gear shift. A man's body landed on the hood of the car, his face cracking the windshield with a spray of blood. He gripped the hood, trying to pull himself forward. The top of his head was gone, and there was no brain inside, just blackness. He looked up at me and I saw that his teeth were missing, ripped out of his bleeding gums. "Help me, please," he groaned. and something pulled him off of the hood with such force that he lost 4 fingers. I know because I found them later on, just beneath my windshield wipers. My passenger side window shattered. I covered my face with my arms, peering through the crack between them to see that the house was burning yellow and white. I could hear screaming and laughing, the sound of children crying. A growing roar was coming from somewhere. I didn't care. I punched the accelerator and the tires spun wildly against the gravel for a moment before getting traction. The car launched forward and I fought like hell to keep driving in a straight line. I only glanced back once to make sure I wasn't being followed, and saw that the house was gone. There were a few floating embers, like fireflies, over the spot where the house had been, that disappeared as soon as I noticed them. I didn't slow down. I don't think I even checked the rear view after that because I didn't want to see anymore. I couldn't take it. I drove myself to the hospital and parked in a no parking zone just outside of the entrance. Through the plate glass doors I could see people, doctors and nurses, and patients and janitors, and was never so happy to see them in my life. I killed the engine and stepped out of the car, only to have my legs give out underneath me. I collapsed to the ground painfully, but I couldn't make a sound. I didn't have the strength anymore. I opened my mouth to call for help, but nothing was happening. I was at a hospital, mind you, and I knew that somebody would eventually come out to help me. The key word there was eventually. It could have been minutes or hours. I didn't know how much more my body was going to take, how much more blood I could lose. All these thoughts raced through my mind as I lay on the ground, trying to scream and trying to get back up. I stopped moving entirely when I heard the click of my car's lock disengaging. The back door on the driver's side slowly opened up, and a leg, clad in black dress pants and a shiny black dress shoe, carefully stepped onto the pavement. Another followed. A man stepped out of the Honda. He was dressed in black, but there was something about him that was almost comforting. His presence was welcomed. I never saw his face. He closed my back door and stood over me for a few seconds. "Thanks for the lift, kid," he said pleasantly, and stepped around me, out of sight. I dimly heard him say, "I think this gentleman needs some help." He walked back towards me and then past me in the opposite direction. From this angle I could see him. I watched him walk away, into the shadows and the streetlights up the street. I could hear him humming faintly, melodically. I'd never heard that melody before, and I haven't heard it again since. I heard the sounds of footsteps approaching, and the way the accompanying voices sounded, they belonged to medical staff. The man stopped halfway down the block, pausing beneath a broken streetlight and looking up at the sky. A white-clad leg stepped in front of me for a split second, and the man was gone when next I looked. His empty clothes hovered in the air for a moment, as if somebody was still inside of them, before collapsing silently into the sidewalk. A black mist floated up towards the sky, engulfing the dead streetlight for a moment, before dissipating entirely. The light flickered a few times and then began to burn brightly. That was the last thing I saw before I passed out. 5 broken ribs, a punctured lung, a cerebral and a cardiac contusion, and a fractured skull. Somehow, I survived. People have made it out of situations with much worse, though, I've since quit Peter Pizza. I haven't exactly gotten my life together as of yet, but I can say that I've been a whole lot happier since the night I was almost killed. The police checked out the house on Alpine Drive, which was nothing more than a foundation that had been abandoned for 3 decades. One of the canine dogs started pawing at the dirt and uncovered part of a child's skull. An excavation of the site uncovered 4 children that had been missing for years, in addition to 9 other missing people. They'd all disappeared under extremely bizarre circumstances. Some had been beaten to death, others stabbed, others unknown. The children had been burned alive, and the rest had been crudely mummified with newspaper and Elmer's glue. I've had a lot of phone calls from family members of the deceased, thanking me for finally giving them closure. I don't know where they get the idea that I was the one they should be thanking, but I was glad they could find the answers they were looking for, even though they only really got half an answer. I doubt I'll ever find the answers I'm looking for. And really, one question weighs on my mind, day in and day out. What the hell were those guys messing around with? And why did it hitch a ride in my back seat? I never, in my lifetime, believed that I would get a second job working in food service. Well, times were tough for my wife and I. My credit was ruined, and our finances were plagued with a medley of last-minute calls and emails to postpone the inevitable, a disconnection of some form. In my mid-40s at the time, I decided to get a second job delivering pizzas for a major local chain. It was a minimum wage job plus any tips that I may acquire on any given night. I had a reliable truck that was practically a second home for me. I can live in this truck, I used to proudly exclaim. It was the mobile tool shed, as I used to call it. It was complete with tools, first aid equipment, lights, power converters, and a nice-sized truck box to hold everything. I'd even drilled a hole in the floor right below the driver's seat that had a hose and an attached retractable funnel. The hose led outside under the truck. On long trips, I'd use the funnel to urinate. I never had to make a pit stop anywhere. The sturdy, solid V8 was perfect for any abuse I'd put it through. It was a gas guzzler, however. I used to say that one could hear an audible glug glug as it greedily consumed gasoline whenever I hit the acceleration pedal. Well, enough about me and my background. Now, on to my story. I do not figure you'll believe my tale, but I assure you it's true, and forever etched in my mind day and night. Aside from a healthy fear of heights, I'm a man of few fears. I don't believe in ghosts or the unexplained supernatural. Until about 3 weeks ago. Even the loss of my first wife and my best friend in the same year forced me to question the very purpose of my existence. No supernatural words from beyond the grave had ever graced me, though. I was simply the most staunch skeptic I know. Spirits and ghosts are for the weak-minded and paranoid fanatics to experience, not me. I'm not a proud or arrogant man, just a skeptic. I also have no irrational fears. Having vivid nightmares as a child had hardened my resolve and purged most irrational fears from my brain. So, my story starts on a typical Saturday night at the pizza place, having just left my full-time job with a major home supply warehouse. I often disliked my full-time job, but the benefits that it supplied my wife and I kept me a loyal and unhappy employee. The pizza place was a relaxing and easy job. I got along well with almost everyone. I even listened to my favorite creepypasta narrator while on my runs. Again, it was a great part-time job. My fellow drivers and I would often talk about how we were stiffed on a run. We would converse about the strange and funny characters we would encounter, We would also compare our tips that we received as well. Now, this here story that I've shared left the other drivers in a confused, almost comical state of disbelief. But this is not a comical story that I'd made up for the amusement of others. This is a story that changed my entire belief system in the unexplained mysteries of the supernatural. On this typical Saturday night, all of us drivers were trying to get the kitchen cleaned up before that last-minute rush. You see, customers can place online orders as late as 11:59 p.m. when the store closes at 12 midnight. Now, this used to piss us off, because it would delay us up to 1 or 2 hours when trying to get out of there at night. Well, this was one of those nights, and my turn was up. I pulled the ticket and scanned over the order to ensure that every item and detail for the order was correct. As I looked at the ticket, I was immediately puzzled by what I'd seen. Weird names, addresses, and numbers were par for the course, but this had me both confused and in awe at the same time. The order called for 1 plain pan pizza with no toppings at all. Now, when I say this, I mean nothing. No sauce, cheese, meat, veggies, just 1 cooked bare pizza dough. That wasn't the bizarre part of the order. The instructions stated that the toppings will be applied to the pizza upon delivery and arrival. George, my supervisor, and I figured this to be some form of prank. It wasn't uncommon for pranks to occur in these situations. So, I called the number on the ticket, and the man on the other line was serious and ensured that this was not a prank, and that a nice tip would be in it for me if the delivery was conducted properly. The voice on the line was that of a terse, middle-aged Hispanic man, who I found vaguely familiar. I told my supervisor, George, that I would go ahead and take the run anyway. I thought again for a moment about the voice I'd just listened to, and still could not trace in my memory of whom it belonged to. I did, however, know it from somewhere. I then proceeded to pack the bare plain pizza up in the red canvas-insulated pizza bag that delivery drivers use to transport food items in. The man on the phone said to go to the drive-through archway at the intersection of Park Street and Anders Road. We deliver pizzas in this area all the time, and I knew there was no archway of any kind out there. Well, or so I thought. At this point, I began to feel a sensation of creeping unease, much like the sensation of swallowing a snow cone whole. I had a bad feeling about this whole thing. I then chided myself for my unease and paranoia. Besides, I told George, I'm very curious about this person, who it is, and what kind of tip's in it for me. Well, good luck, George said apprehensively. Call my cell if you need anything. Will do, I said, as I left for the door, order in hand. Park Street was lined with tall oaks and various dense shrubs and undergrowth. Anders Road was a right turn intersection only, that began at a stop sign. Go through the archway, the voice spoke to me in my thoughts. I was certain there was no archway there at all, because I'd been on this route numerous times and had never noticed an archway of any kind before. I pressed on along Park Street in my truck, playing the voice over and over in my head. Where have I heard that voice? I kept repeating to myself. As I began to approach the intersection that was stated in the instructions, I began to notice something faintly ahead. I rubbed my eyes and shook my head in disbelief at what I was seeing. The faint image of a drive-through gate began to appear. Now, when I say it began to appear, what I really meant is that it was materializing like the tiny flecks of gold as they appear in a treasure hunter's pan while sifting sand in a creek. The closer I drove in the direction of the archway gate, the more of it would materialize. I abruptly stopped the truck, put on my hazard lights, and then looked back to see if anyone was behind me. There was no one at all. I began to drive in reverse while keeping my eyes on the archway straight ahead. As I drove in reverse, the image began to slowly disappear. "I gotta see this," I said out loud, as I proceeded forward again. When I reached the arch, it was fully materialized at this point. There was a gate that was slowly swinging open, revealing a dirt pathway that lay ahead. My headlights shone down the dirt road at a security guard directly in front of me. He held out his hand as if motioning me to stop. I did. "How's it going tonight? How long—" I began, as the guard abruptly cut me off. "Driver's license, please," he barked. I knew he was no cop, but I handed him my license. He looked it over and handed it back to me. "Hey, what's with the attitude, dude?" I retorted. He said nothing in response to my question. "It's the last house on the left. Straight ahead," he instructed. "Oh, thanks. Remember to look up what a sense of humor is," I yelled out the window as I started to drive onward. I was exhausted and in no mood to put up with any shitty attitudes at this point, especially from some stupid security guard. I looked in my rearview mirror in frustration, but the guard and his shack were gone. I stopped the truck and got out to get a better look behind me. He and his shack were gone. I was feeling a bit freaked out at this point. "Hello?" I yelled back. No response. An odd hissing sound was beginning to come from the trees and the bushes to my left. It sounded like whispers growing louder and louder. I decided to get my ass back in the truck. I didn't want to know what was causing this strange whispering around me. God, where the hell was I? I proceeded cautiously in what turned out to be about 3 minutes or so, until I saw a sign that said 4th Street. There was an odd assortment of homes to my left. A mansion of a home with 2 9-foot-tall gargoyle statues was the first one I saw. Then a trailer home decorated with animal skulls and obscure tribal decorations at the patio. Then a modest 1-story home painted yellow with a chain-link fence. Then another run-down trailer home, as well as a 2-story home with 2 large pillars at the entrance. Then the house I needed to reach came before me. When I saw the house, goosebumps immediately went down my spine. It flooded me with disbelief and bone-crushing hatred. I felt like I was going to faint. The small 2-bedroom home was just as I remembered it. My late wife's parents, Joe and Anita's home. The voice on the phone was that of my former father-in-law. I hated them for how they treated me and how they disrespected my marriage to their daughter Melissa. Missy is what we called her. Missy passed away 3 months after we wed, due to an aggressive, insidious heart condition. She was taken by her parents from the hospital a day before she passed away. She was not at my side when she passed on. I was forever resentful of them because of this. The town that this house belonged to was over 200 miles away, and I'd just driven up to it in a matter of minutes. I was utterly baffled at this and began to question my own sanity. The homes that resided on this street were out of place and seemingly did not belong together either, as they looked like they'd been here for years. An exciting curiosity began to arise within me. I'm about to be a part of something that makes no rational sense, I thought to myself. I checked my phone and there was no service at all, no bars. The reception of my smartphone was always crystal clear in this part of town. The temperature was very cool, as the thermometer on my truck read 54 degrees Fahrenheit. But it was September in South Texas, and my phone weather report said 88 degrees Fahrenheit. I had apparently crossed through some sort of portal or dimension. I put the truck in park and stepped out and onto the dirt driveway. No birds or insect sounds were evident whatsoever. I stood there and stared at the house that had both haunted and angered me for over 2 decades. I needed closure, and I needed it in a bad way. With pizza bag in hand, I walked silently to the door. My heart was pounding in my chest like a bass drum, and my ears were ringing so loudly I could barely hear my own voice. I carried a machete at my side, in its sheath. I spent an hour or so sharpening it to a degree of almost that of a straight razor. It gave me a slight comfort in the event anything turned, well, dangerous, I suppose. I also owned a 9mm pistol, but didn't have a permit to carry it in a concealed manner. The machete would have to do, I suppose. I then took a deep breath and knocked on the door. I waited in apprehension for what seemed like 5 minutes or so. Then the knob turned and the door opened. What I saw stunned me because it defied all logic and reason. There they were, standing side by side. It was Joe and Anita, but something was definitely off. It took a second or two to realize what was giving me this feeling. They looked like they were in their mid-50s, just as I remember them 22 years ago. The last time I saw them, it was the year 1995. Surely they should be in their 70s at this point, or possibly even passed on. But they look just like I remember them. I regained my composure. I have your order here. That'll be $19.35. I must have sounded so stupid when I said this. I wonder if they recognized me, due to the fact I'd grown 2 inches and gained about 60 pounds over the past 22 years. The answer to that question was promptly answered when Joe spoke. Vince, you look good. I'd grown and filled out nicely since 1995. You look taller, and it looks like you gained weight too. You remember me? I questioned, with a tone of ambivalence. Of course, Anita said in that shrill tone that I always utterly despised. How did you Did you ask for me specifically? I stammered. We have our ways, Anita replied. What do you mean, ways? What kind of ways? I asked, with visible frustration in my voice. Never mind that now, Anita snapped. I remember how she was always so annoying when she acted like this. How did you find me? And why? I asked in a slightly angered state. It will be explained to you when we begin the ceremony. Come in and meet our leader and savior, Joe said cheerfully. I gulped nervously. God, some kind of cult leader, I figured. They were always so obsessed with the charlatan healers of televangelism of the 90s and early 2000s. The deep resentment I felt for Joe and Anita was changing to a form of confused dread. Something inside of me, call it intuition, told me to go with them inside and not to resist them. After all, here I was in an unknown place, where some sort of portal exists. I decided to be cooperative and go with them, inside with a pizza bag in hand. Kathy will take the pizza from you so she can prepare the topping for it, Joe instructed. A middle-aged Caucasian woman smiled at me and took the bare pizza to the kitchen. Topping? Just one topping for the pizza? I asked. You'll know soon enough, honey, said a Jamaican woman from behind me. I'm Demetria, she said as she held out her hand. I shook it tentatively. I'm Denise, said a heavy-set lady with a warm smile to the left of me in the tiny living room. And Amy is in the kitchen preparing the pizza, Denise said. Then there was a knock at the door, and an elderly man with a ball cap on came inside. "Hey there, Pete," said Demetria. Pete waved at everyone, politely and cheerfully. "Now we are just waiting on Malcolm, our leader," said Demetria. "Oh, I'm so excited for you guys," chimed Denise, cheerfully, while gesturing toward Joe and Anita. It became apparent at that point that they were to be the focal point of this ceremony, I thought. "What's about to happen here? I can't be out on dispatch too long," I explained. "Don't worry, hon," explained Demetria. "You see, time stops in this place." "I don't see," I said with visible apprehension and frustration. "What the hell is going on here?" "Take it easy. Malcolm will explain everything when he gets here," Pete calmly spoke, visibly trying to keep me at ease. At this point, an aroma of cooking meat began to fill the living room. It resembled the smell of seasoned pork or venison. It was making me surprisingly hungry as well. I looked again at my phone, and it was still frozen. I was beginning to develop a cold sweat, and was fearing for my safety at this point. Everyone seemed nice and neighborly enough, despite the feelings I displayed toward Joe and Anita, who were obviously the focal point of this event. Then, in my peripheral vision, a tall man, adorned in a long, elaborate cape or gown, walked in. When I say tall man, I mean he was about 7 feet tall, like an NBA basketball player. The gown was of a beautiful, silky black design, with some of the most elaborate embroidery I'd ever seen. His hair was long and black, and tied in a ponytail that reached his waist. The man bore a striking resemblance to an enormous version of Gene Simmons from the rock group Kiss. The embroidery on the gown were those of an intricate form of hieroglyphics that I'd never seen before. On his head rested a headband encrusted with what appeared to be rubies, emeralds, and sapphires. "Joe and Anita," his voice boomed over the cacophony of noisy conversations happening all around me. Joe and Anita went over to give the tall man a reverent hug. "Ah, you must be Vince," he said to me, offering an outstretched hand that was the size of a tennis racket. Yep, that's me," I said nervously, and shook his hand. He had the grip of an anaconda. Now, I like a firm handshake, but this was ridiculous. He was a truly massive mountain of a man. He was very polite, and carried an authoritative poise that emanated from him like a lighthouse on a stormy sea. "Let us all come to the living room," Malcolm's voice boomed in his powerful, deep way. "We will begin shortly, and you, my dear Vincent, will reside in the middle of the circle," instructed Malcolm. "Joe and Anita will be inside the circle as well, facing Vince," he further instructed. Now, the circle that was prepared for this ritual was about 10 feet in diameter and contained 3 triangles inverted inside of one another. Inside of the smallest triangle, and in the middle of the circle, was a painted blue eye peering upward. Someone with a fair degree of artistic talent had painted this eye. It possessed a startling degree of realism that immediately caught my attention. Malcolm further instructed everyone to surround myself, Joe, and Anita in a circle just outside the drawn one on the floor. Everyone was told to hold hands through most of the ritual. This was getting very creepy, and somehow I knew I was in this for the long haul, whether I liked it or not. "Pizza's ready," called Amy from the kitchen. Each person, including myself, was handed a paper plate with 1 slice of pizza on it. But why? I wondered as I quietly went along with everyone else. This was peer pressure on an entirely different level, I thought comically. The pizza had slices of what appeared to be in the shape of a pepperoni, but was clearly something else. It had a deep brown and burgundy look to it, and it was fried and looked crispy. It also smelled coppery and metallic, but not bad. The following events that occurred can only be described as some kind of seance, and I was directly in the middle of it all. Malcolm directed me to stand with each foot on either side of the eye, and was sternly told not to stand on the eye under any circumstances. I did as instructed and waited. I was in the dead center of the circle, and Joe and Anita were facing me inside the circle, and Malcolm was to my left. Amy began to pour a line from a bag of pure sea salt that surrounded the outside of the outer ring of the circle. Everyone gathered around the edge of the circle, inside the salt ring. And this is when everything began to get seriously freaking crazy. "Do not leave the salt circle until I say it is safe. Do you understand?" Malcolm said to me, while preparing some other things under his gown. "What?" I began, until he gently put his hand over my mouth, suddenly repeating loudly, "Do you understand?" As he repeated, staring directly into my eyes with his dark and almost black soul-numbering eyes, I said, "Fine. Yes, fine, gotcha." I figured I was just going to keep my mouth shut from now on, wait to see what played out. A part of me was excited to be, well, part of something that was out of my realm of rational explanation. I might as well make the best of this. "May I ask what the pizza slice is for?" I politely inquired. "And what do I personally have to do with this?" "You'll know soon enough," Demetria replied, as everyone was seeming to avoid eye contact with me. "Just follow any instructions Malcolm gives you, okay?" Pete said. I said nothing, and just waited in nervous anticipation again. Malcolm began to chant loudly with his eyes closed. He was chanting in some unknown language that resembled Latin mixed with some African tribal speak, or at least that's the best way I could describe it. Everyone's eyes were closed, except for mine, as something began to sound like that whispering I'd heard earlier while I was driving up here. The sensation of what I can best describe as an electric anxiety began to thrum in my feet, and then rose slowly up to my head. The feeling was like getting that unexpected high that you get from laughing gas at a dentist's office, but more electric in feel. It was definitely energy, though. I heard a moist sound that sounded like someone with their hands inside a bowl of ground meat, directly below me. The eye was looking around and searching the room, then finally resting its gaze on me and looking down at it. "Whoa, no wonder he said don't step on the eye," I said aloud for some reason, but no one appeared to hear me. Malcolm continued with his chanting as the room outside the salt ring began to fade into darkness. It appeared like we were in a cylinder of light, surrounded by complete dark. Forms and figures began to appear around the circle that surrounded us. Nightmarish beings, creatures, I don't know what the hell they were, but they began to appear all around us. We were all being watched by these beings of all shapes and sizes, like we were in some sort of fishbowl. I saw something that resembled an eagle with a snake-like head and reptilian cat's eyes flying around in and out of the light. Bipedal figures with a gaping hole for a mouth and no other discernible features were walking and touching the circle. They were a pale beige color, with red vein-like streaks coming from their gaping maws. A trunk of some unknown form rose from the sand outside the circle. It was roughly the size of a giant California redwood tree. It had a large, multi-jointed mouth, with ridges of shark-like teeth about 3 feet long. It looked like a demonic sea lamprey. I was paralyzed with fear and awe at the same time. I remained perfectly still, but my head was looking all around. Smaller creatures were flying so fast and bouncing off of the boundary like some forms of exotic insects to a lamp on a hot, humid summer night. My skepticism at this point was dissolving like a sugar cube in a hot cup of coffee. Malcolm spoke loudly. "Let le pacto de sangre begin." Well, my Spanish was shitty, but I knew it meant some kind of blood ritual. Everyone began to eat their pizza, and I was directed to do so too. The familiar taste of the buttery baked crust filled my palate, but there was also the salty, iron taste of the topping. Well, I've had some blood sausage before, and figured that this was what that was resembling, only slightly better tasting, like a pork taste. The aftertaste reminded me of when I was a child and put a penny in my mouth, that metallic coppery taste. Malcolm procured a shallow saucer-shaped bowl, pruning shears, some olive oil with some of those same hieroglyphs on the bottle, and a book of matches. He had a second pouch with 7 syringes of some form of medication. Before I could ask what everything was for, I felt a pinch as a needle entered my jugular. I felt a rush of narcotic fluid in my system. Demerol, possibly, maybe morphine. I was guided to sit down on the floor and saw everyone else do the same. Malcolm, in one skilled, decisive motion, grasped my left hand and then cut my pinky finger off with the shears, causing a slow spout of blood, like a slow, defective drinking fountain flowing into the bowl with the severed finger. He touched the stump with an ornate amulet, and the wound was cauterized. The pain was dull and sudden, but distant and dreamlike. I was in shock and disbelief as I watched Malcolm repeat the process with each person in the room. Blood spurts, cries of pain, and laughter began to fill the room. The blood splatter covered many of the faces in the room, as they were all drugged and sedated, but awake. Malcolm poured the sacred oil into the bowl of fingers and blood, lit a match, and tossed it into the bowl. The flames lit immediately, and lasted for about 3 seconds, and then the bowl was empty. "El pacto de sangre is now complete, and the sacrifice has been granted," Malcolm shouted. At this point the eye began to emit a green mist. "We welcome the beloved departed to come before us," he chanted. Slightly above the mist, a ghostly figure began to form right in front of my face. My jaw dropped, and I said something like, No way," in my dazed state. It was Missy, my late wife. She looked like she was when she was in her best condition. "Hey, you," her apparition said. She always said that to me. I began to feel tears fall from my eyes as I said, "Missy?" She leaned forward and spoke into my ear and said that I was about to be sacrificed and killed, but I could escape as soon as the boundary began to disappear and the outside room started to reappear. And then she was gone in the blink of an eye. "Now Joe and Anita can see their lost daughter at any time," Malcolm said, as he looked up with his eyes closed. So this was what this was all about. I was spirit bait, I thought. The thought came to me in an instant. I'd had 2 spinal surgeries and had a strong tolerance for narcotic and opiate chemicals. Everyone, including Joe and Anita, were in a drunken, dazed stupor. But I was coming to, already regaining my bearings faster than everyone else. Malcolm was cleaning up the scene, as the room slowly began to fade very gradually back into sight. I pulled out my machete and thought to myself, now's your chance. Everything that occurred next happened all in the span of about 5 minutes, but seemed like half an hour. I waited for Malcolm to turn his back to me, and when he did, he bent over to pick up something. I kicked him right in the butt and sent him tumbling forward in an awkward thump, and I bolted for it right then without looking back. Dimitri's voice drunkenly rang out, "He's getting away!" "He won't get far," Malcolm said, and smiled deviously. He laughed. I began to run and stagger as well because I was still a bit medicated, but the door was unlocked. I made it to my truck without anyone pursuing me, which both surprised me and confused me at the same time. I jumped in, started the truck up, and smiled. I'd never been so grateful to get back to familiar ground. I floored it. I saw the gate ahead, and then I saw two enormous figures running right at me. Oh shit, the gargoyles! They moved with an unholy grace and were magnificent in appearance. Giant humanoid figures with three-toed clawed feet and hands the size of basketball hoops. Their heads looked like the heads of a bat, with toweringly tall ears and enormous glowing red eyes and 12-inch tusks jutting from their lower jaw. They were identical in appearance as well. They were side by side, about 20 feet apart in a clearing before the gate arch. I began to veer to the right, in hopes to fake both of them right. Only one of them fell for it. I passed one of them, and the other one I struck head-on, doing about 30 miles an hour. It fell slightly to my left, as it grabbed and tore off my rear-view side mirror and burst the driver's side window. Minute shards of glass sprayed shrapnel, and I left a dozen or so small shallow cuts to my left cheek. I could feel the rivulets of blood on my cheek from the impact. My truck began to slow and skid to the right, but was still going somewhat forward. I knew that if I was stopped, I was dead meat, and Joe and Anita would get their sacrifice. I was not about to give them the satisfaction. A giant clawed hand groped and tore my shoulder, ripping it from the steering wheel. I was able to get it back on the wheel, however. It had sprayed my blood all over the windshield inside in a cascade of red dots. I could feel the burning flesh wound bleed steadily, but not too alarmingly, thankfully. I could take pain pretty well, better than the average Joe. I then grabbed the machete, and with all the adrenaline-fueled strength my right hand could summon up, swung it at a 45-degree angle at the gargoyle's upper wrist. It dug in about 2 inches. I heard a muffled roar at that point, and felt the gargoyle release its grip. The truck regained straight motion again, when I felt an immediate decrease in speed, and my tires began to spin. I was now dragging 2 gargoyles, and was down to about 8 miles an hour. I slammed the truck into reverse and floored it again, feeling the impact of one of the creatures as I saw it fall back. Again, I put it in drive and hit the gas, and was now moving unhindered, and shot through the archway with a roar. I stopped to look back, and I somehow knew that I was safe at that point. One of the hands of one of the creatures breached the arch, and I saw it literally burn and disappear in a cloud of smoke. It roared and retracted immediately. After that, I never looked back. The restaurant was a mere 5 minutes away from where I was. I arrived at my usual spot and looked down at my hand, surprised to see that my pinky finger was still there, my shirt and shoulder intact. I walked back into the restaurant and looked at my phone to notice that, from when I'd left with the pizza until now, only 11 minutes had passed. "Time stops here," I remember someone saying. I laughed out loud when I realized this, and George came over to me and said, "How'd it go? Get a good tip?" I was laughing and shaking my head and said, "Long story, dude." "Long story? You got back pretty quick. How long can it be?" He laughed, and I said, "Well, let's just say I was in some form of time capsule," I explained. George asked again, So, what happened? I asked him if he was a superstitious man, and he said, "Yes, I am." About 4 days went by. I'd shared my tale to a few of the drivers with comical disbelief as a response. Well, since then, I've done countless hours of research about what happened to me and what kind of rituals these were. The pizza I ate was the ground-up, prepared, preserved remains of Missy's heart. The man that performed the bizarre cannibalistic ritual, Malcolm, was just an alias. His real name was Dr. Arturo Ramirez, a professor of forensic anthropology at a prestigious university. He was suspended and then released due to unorthodox practices of ancient blood sacrifices and rituals. He had a compound and a following of around 85 people, including those of my late wife's parents, Joe and Anita. As for how I was found and how the portal was created, those are still mysteries to me. I realize that hate is a strong concept that has influences beyond human comprehension, and I was almost the victim of this hatred on a level never thought possible before. I try to tell others that evil does exist, as well as spirits and supernatural realms that cannot be understood or properly explained. At around the 4-day mark, I received a package in the mail at my apartment. It was a small box, about the size of a child's shoebox. It was wrapped in plain brown paper with no return address. Inside was 5 bundles of crisp $100 bills in quantities of 10 per bundle, and a plain white note that said, "Your tip," and the faint scent of my late wife's favorite perfume, called Calyx, rising to greet me. I smiled. "Thank you," I said out loud. I never did speak about this to anyone again, that is, until today. Now it's off my chest, and it's time to move on. After all, I have more pizzas to deliver, and this means, well, more bizarre and fascinating tales to come. A common legend among truck drivers is that of the black dog. If one is seen on the road during a particularly long trip, it has ominous implications. As pizza delivery drivers, we have a similar story that circulates around as well. There are days when we're running deliveries well into the night, sometimes as late as till 1 a.m. It's not uncommon to see deer, dogs, cats, raccoons, and various other animals cross the streets in front of you in the late hours of the night. Several drivers and I have reported seeing the mountain lion or the bobcat during very tiresome, long, late nights. The black rats, that's another phenomenon that I have experienced as well as the other drivers. This entails seeing black shadow-like figures that resemble rats running alongside of the vehicle in your peripheral vision. I have a story about a unique encounter during the wee hours of the night that happened to me on a particularly long and stressful night toward the end of a 14-hour shift. It was insanity. Order after order kept coming up on the screen. "Jeez, when are we going to catch a damn break?" I said, rolling my eyes in frustration. "These half-price internet orders are kicking our ass," I laughingly exclaimed. "No shit," James said. He was one of the other drivers that I get along with pretty well. "Oh, still on for some night fishing?" I asked. "Huck yeah," he cheerfully replied. "Hey, I'll bring a 12-pack this time," he said. "You said that last time, goober," I joked. "Well, sounds good to me," I replied though. I was pretty exhausted, and fatigue was creeping in insidiously. I was beginning to feel dizzy, and my eyelids were getting heavy. I was already running out of energy from my second wind, a renewed burst of energy that I received after the initial wave of fatigue sets in. I was hanging on 6 hours of sleep in total within the last 48 hours. Well, I printed the ticket out for the order, and it was for a familiar dark stretch of street that I'd delivered to many times before. Contour Road was a curvy stretch of road that wound to and fro in sharp hairpin turns. It was a heavily wooded pathway with large boulders along the roadside scattered in random locations. This was a very attractive and scenic route during the daytime, but downright eerily spooky at night. There were no street lamps at all, and the luxurious homes were scattered about far off of the main road. So, I was driving along Contour Road when I saw 3 deer canter out of the woods in front of me. Then I saw 2 more running behind them at a faster speed. Suddenly, out of the bushes, what appeared to be about 9 or 10 more deer began to sprint out into the street as if being pursued by something. I braked to a near stop to see what was going on, and my headlights saw a long and low black figure of some kind of animal that was carrying an entire deer in its jaws. I froze when I realized that whatever this thing was carrying a buck in its jaws that had to weigh over 130 pounds. Jeez, what the hell is that? I said aloud as I watched it carry the buck by the neck into the woods and then disappear. There was the city zoo nearby, and I began to wonder if a big cat was loose, but, well, this was no cat. It was long and low, no more than 3 feet off the ground. It was about 8 feet long and appeared to have an enormous head and 6 legs, or at least I think it did. I carried a powerful handheld spotlight that I used to spot addresses in apartment buildings at night. I drove forward and saw a clearing. I directed my spotlight toward the clearing and saw the dead deer. It was already torn almost entirely in 2. I could see the blood and entrails scattered about. Whatever had taken this deer had to be enormously powerful to tear up an animal this size in a matter of seconds. My heart thudded in my chest, and my ears were ringing at this point. I pointed my light around the edges of the clearing, not daring to get out of the truck. I'd obtained my concealed firearm license and had my loaded 9mm in my hand as well. Then, coming out of the clearing, was the creature I'd seen. My jaw dropped, and my entire body was absolutely petrified with fear. My firearm gave me little comfort at this point. The appearance of the creature was only part of the horror that I'd stumbled upon. Now, as I'd stated before, this was definitely no escaped lion or tiger from the city zoo. This was a creature that more likely resembled an alligator or crocodile in body, but with 6 legs that were more like a giant centipede's jointed legs with claw-like hooks. The head was the most ghastly part of the creature, as if the body weren't dreadful enough. The head resembled a bizarre amalgamation of a gorilla crossed with a wolf. The eyes were enormous and bright white with compound, multifaceted pupils. Its eyes were full of an intelligence that bore into my own eyes like it was looking me over. Its gaze had a hypnotic effect on me, and I felt as if I couldn't turn my eyes away from it. It had a tail that resembled a scorpion's tail, but flattened out and low-slung. The color of the creature was a beautifully terrifying glossy black hue, and the teeth were shark-like and very long and thick and surprisingly white in color. I was frozen and yet captivated by the creature and couldn't tear my gaze away from it. It finally turned round and grabbed something else from behind the clearing, but this was no deer. Holy f... I blurted out as I saw a human torso, or well, part of one. The head was gone, and one of the arms and both of the legs were missing, seemingly torn off. The tattered and torn remains of what appeared to be a jogging suit clung to the remains, which were covered with blood and gore. Bone and organs and skin were torn gruesomely all over and hanging from the remains. The creature was consuming its meal in tears that could be heard from 20 to 30 meters distance. It sounded like tearing wet fabric, truly nauseating. I immediately called 911 and began to explain exactly what I was seeing. The man on the line said to stay put. Help was en route. I was also instructed not to leave my vehicle for any reason until help arrived. Roger that, I said with a bit of sarcasm. I wasn't going anywhere. Within a matter of 5 to 7 minutes, there were 2 Army Black Hawk helicopters cruising very low, and then 3 military personnel vehicles were on site within 15 minutes. I saw 4 men in what appeared to be full tactical gear surround the creature. The creature began to turn its head and thrash about before one of the men hit it with what appeared to be a grenade launcher type of gun. It launched a large dart the size of a baseball bat to the side of the creature. Within 30 seconds, it had gone still and was being maneuvered onto a sling of some sort. I was escorted to one of the vehicles and was told to get in. "Why do I need to get in with you guys?" I asked confusingly. "We'll explain when we get there," a woman in tactical gear said as I was riding to a football field park area. One of the Black Hawks was waiting for us to arrive. I was helped into the chopper and sat in the rear. "Where are we heading to?" I asked. "I need to check into work, to let them know." I began, but was cut off when the female lieutenant named Garrison said, "Already taken care of. You're going to be with us for a day or so." "Where are we going?" I yelled over the noisy cabin of the Black Hawk. "Can't tell you. Classified," a male sergeant named Cummins said in response. "The trip will take about 90 minutes, said the other sergeant named Calderon, who was shorter in stature and was dark-skinned. We arrived at some form of military medical facility, where I was escorted into a room with 2 military nurses and a doctor in a long white lab coat. They were looking into my eyes with an instrument and then injected me with a syringe of some unknown chemical. It burned like fire as it entered my bloodstream, and I felt like I was doped up with Demerol or Diawoodid. My eyes were burning at this point, and I was given a mirror to look at my eyes. God, I was totally shocked at what I saw. My pupils were gone. God, what in the living hell is I began. "They'll return to normal in a few hours," the doctor said. "I'm Dr. Alderson." He extended his hand. "Call me Vince," I said, and shook his hand. He was a tall, thin man, but not gaunt in appearance. "I'm the doctor of infectious diseases here at this facility, and all I can tell you is that we're in a covert underground facility in the state of Louisiana. Do you remember feeling a form of hypnosis when the creature looked at you?" he calmly asked. Yeah, I did. For about 20 seconds or so, I think," I replied. "You were lucky," he said. "Most of the people we treat after encountering this creature have some form of permanent eye damage," he explained. "Oh, what is that thing anyway?" I asked. "Can't disclose that info," he replied. I sighed in frustration. Figured you'd say that. "Is there anything at all you can tell me?" I asked with a tone of frustration. "Only that it was a classified biological discovery from the remote parts of the Amazon rainforest. People and animals in a small town were going missing," he further explained. "Everything from birds, alligators, snakes, monkeys, and even people were coming up missing. I've already said too much." Look, take these pills for a week, 1 per day with your meal. Your eyes will return to normal within the next 2 or 3 hours, Dr. Alderson instructed. Just like that, I was back on the chopper and heading back to the field my truck was parked in. You can discuss this with others if you'd like, as we didn't give you any classified information that would create any clear and present danger, Lieutenant Garrison instructed. But if you notice any strange symptoms or feel anything out of the ordinary with your sight, call this number. Do not call 911 or the police, understand? Yes, ma'am, I replied as she handed me a business card that was black and had a Department of Defense logo on the card and Lieutenant Garrison's number on the back. 2 or 3 days went by without any odd symptoms at first. I did, however, begin to have a strong sensitivity to light, and my night vision was improving. My eyes began to change color to a light snowy blue. This garnered quite a few comments and questions about what type of contact lenses I was using. Or, well, hey, what's up with your eye color? Things like that. I called the number to report the changes in my eyesight that had begun to occur. In response, I was repeatedly sent a bottle of pills to suppress any further changes in my eyesight. Wow. To this day, I remember the haunting gaze of that creature like it was yesterday. It will forever be etched into my brain. So, I still deliver pizzas, but I don't need a flashlight very often anymore. Well, as I conclude the tale of this experience, I have a new respect for deer crossing signs now. Well, shh, yeah, I know it's... here it is, I said aloud to myself as I retrieved the black business card with Lieutenant Garrison's number from my man purse, or merce, as my wife called it. I pulled out my cell phone and dialed the number. Lieutenant Garrison here, the terse voice on the other line responded. Oh, hi, Lieutenant. It's Vince again. Hi, Vince. Ready for another refill? She asked. Yeah, I suppose so, but something's different, I said apprehensively. I can't even leave the house without the light causing me a lot more discomfort than before. Not even the sunglasses are helping much now, I further added. Really? Anything else I should know? She asked. Well, yeah, I'm seeing in the pitch black darkness, as if it's mere twilight. I'm able to see vivid colors as well, but only at night, I explained further. I looked at the bottle of Morphox, the medication given me to suppress these symptoms. I only had 1 pill left. Well, I guess my body's developing a tolerance for this stuff, is all I can think of, Bob said. Okay, go to Churchill baseball field at 0800 hours on Saturday. We'll have a chopper standing by to pick you up. I'll make the necessary calls to free your schedule, instructed Garrison. Okay, I'll be there, I responded, and then turned off the call. Now, I'll try to explain the events leading up to my call to Lieutenant Garrison. I had an encounter with a creature, or some form of living entity that was not of this natural environment. I stumbled upon and made eye contact with this horrific creature. It resembled a chitinous black onyx alligator with a scorpion's tail and an enormous head that resembled a gorilla crossed with a wolf. And its eyes were the strangest thing. They were pure white and multifaceted. The creature's gaze met mine for about 20 seconds or so. The feeling at that moment was hypnotic. It had frozen me in place for the entire time it looked at me. And this is when I began to change. And it all began with my eyes at first. They began to turn an icy blue instead of my normal green eyes. My night vision had always been mediocre to poor most of the time, but that had changed. I saw nighttime as if it were mere twilight. The experience of looking about in my truck outside in the middle of the night was a surreal experience, to say the least. Now, everyone has the impression of driving around at night in their mind. Streetlights on, car headlights zooming by, house porch lights lit sporadically throughout neighborhoods, nighttime runners with reflective gear on, as well as cyclists with their strobe-like headlamps to alert drivers of their presence. Imagine taking a typical city night and seeing it as if the sun were out. Well, that was what I was experiencing. Things happened at night that did not normally happen during the day. People sneaking about mischievously, cats active all over, bats zooming around to and fro, armadillos, skunks, raccoons, possums all out in the open to see. I even witnessed a group of what appeared to be teenagers laughing and joking around gleefully, puffing on cigarettes and vape pipes. The regular side of nighttime activities, seen as if it were day, was an interesting thing to experience, to say the least. But, well, daytime was a nightmare, no pun intended. I wore a hoodie with these super dark Ray-Ban sunglasses that were given to me by the doctor that first treated me. And this was my daytime apparel. When I was at home, I had everything dark so I wouldn't suffer too much. My sleep cycle was turning upside down now, and I couldn't go to any work for a while. Thankfully, the government guys that had been treating me were compensating me more than enough monetarily to make ends meet, so my work absence didn't concern me too much. I began to go for long walks at night, and was really enjoying myself. This all changed, of course, when the pain and swelling began in my eyes. My eyes were always dry, and needed drops constantly, and they felt like they were growing in size. I'd look in a mirror and see that my face was looking more and more like a caricature of myself. My eye sockets and eyes were growing in size. And that's when I decided to call Lieutenant Garrison again. I was at the baseball field about 5 minutes early, and I immediately heard it. The Black Hawk helicopter was touching down already. This must have been one of those pave hawks the military had for night and stealth activities. It had the sound of a helicopter, but was very much muffled and quieter. Kind of like a gun with a silencer or something like that. It was technologically modified for quick, stealthy operations. I was escorted into the cabin, where I saw Lieutenant Garrison and Sergeant Calderon. They had night vision equipment on their heads as they greeted me, and they shook hands with me. I returned the pleasantries. I could see everything in the cabin like it was daytime. The windows were blacked out, except for the front windshield. In around 90 minutes or so, we were at a bunker-like underground facility. I was escorted to an office that was dimly lit, and was told to take a seat and make myself comfortable. I smelled fresh coffee, and saw a pot full and some pastries. I was hungry as hell and helped myself to 2 bear claws and a cup of coffee with cream and sugar. The pastries were a little bit stale, but the coffee, well, that was legendary, strong and smooth. I'd heard Army coffee was some of the best and strongest, and I had 3 cups greedily. I lay in a recliner and played Angry Birds on my phone for a while, before the door opened and 3 people entered the room. I recognized Lieutenant Garrison and Sergeant Calderon, but the third was a man I did not recognize. "I'm Colonel Daltrey," the man said as he gave me a firm handshake. "Call me Vince," I said in return. "Very well, Vince," he said. Colonel Daltrey was a stout man in his early 60s or so, and in impeccable health. He had dark, salt-and-pepper crew-cut hair and captivating blue eyes. He carried an immense amount of authority, with grace and trained humility. I could see he was a very decorated man as well. "I bet you have some questions for us," Daltrey said politely. "Well, sir, I suppose I do," I replied. "So, what's next for me in my situation?" I asked. Daughtry gestured to Sergeant Cauldron. We need your help. There are some risks, but we will have armed personnel backing you up, so you'll be safe, Cauldron explained. We cannot disclose where you'll be going, but you will know what you need to know as all this plays out, Garrison explained. If you choose not to help us, we can have you on a Black Hawk and back home within 2 hours, Colonel Daughtry explained. You will be administered a more potent form of Morphinox, and, well, that'll be that, he added. If you choose to help us, the mission will take about 3 days, maybe 4, and you will be nicely compensated, Daughtry explained. The choice is yours, Cauldron added. I thought for a second how much I admire our military, and how I wished I could be a part of it, and this made my decision an easy one. I'll do it, I eagerly said, with a thumbs-up motion. Your country and all of us appreciate your assistance on this, son, Colonel Daughtry said. Sergeant Cauldron will show you to your quarters. We'll leave at 0600 hours, so relax and get some sleep, Daughtry said, as he shook my hand again and left the room. This was the beginning of an unforgettable adventure that changed, well, my life. I'd slept only sporadically that night, and spent most of my time watching TV in the dorm room like Sweet. I was both excited and scared at the same time. A gentle knock at the door came at 0500 hours, and I was given a black shirt, black hoodie, and black sweatpants. They were clean and well pressed. I was ready to go. I was escorted to a C-130, all ready to go, and we were born at 0600 dead on. There were no flight delays in the military, that's for sure. I was in the back of the aircraft, where it was the darkest and most comfortable. I wasn't told where I was going, but I knew we were heading south according to a compass I'd seen in the cabin somewhere. The flight took the better part of 8 hours or so. We landed in a covert airstrip that was somewhere tropical. It looked like the rainforests of the Amazon. The temperature was warm and impossibly humid. The camp we were at was a clearing of about a quarter-mile square. I was led to a one-person armored vehicle of sorts. I'd never seen a vehicle like this before. It was a boxy, van-like thing that looked like it was heavily armored with a bulletproof viewing window. This is what you'll be driving, Sergeant Cauldron instructed. Driving? I asked, totally confused. He proceeded to show me how to operate the vehicle, and it proved to be fairly easy. The tires were made for off-road work, and it was fairly easy to drive. It wasn't very fast, but it didn't need to be. It was armed with a semi-automatic cannon that shot golf ball-sized depleted uranium shells. I had 12 rounds already set in the chamber. The two-way radio was positioned right in front of me, so I could communicate with the other officers and soldiers. It was, well, like a mini-tank of sorts. The operation was to occur in the dead of night, and my eyesight was to be used to relay verbally and photograph whatever I saw. Their night vision equipment had proven ineffective because what I was looking for just screwed up their night vision systems. They needed me because of my newfound visual talents. There was a gate that was guarded by 4 armed guards that were heavily armed with tactical gear and heavy rifles of some form. Just past the gate was a peculiar shadow-like opening. It looked like a ripped opening that led to another place. It was a portal. Just past the portal, there were alien sounds that were coming directly from it. I was in awe at what I was witnessing. This portal led to the unknown, the uncharted. It was a new discovery, and I was going to be the first to see it. Okay, it's go time, yelled Lieutenant Garrison over the comm system. I started up the vehicle and began to drive forward toward the portal. Stalker 1 is on the move, a male voice sounded over the radio. Stalker 1 was my handle for the duration of this operation. "All set, Stalker 1. Everything running right?" Calderon's voice sounded over the radio. "All is go, over," I responded. Everything was happening so fast, I just hoped the crash course I'd received from Sergeant Calderon was enough to get the job done. I turned on the camera and flipped up the red switch, arming the cannon. I went forward for about 5 minutes. The suspense was so palpable, you could cut it with a knife. What happened next was unforgettable insanity. I crossed the threshold of the portal. The portal was about 16 feet high and 10 feet wide. "How was this opened?" I asked over the comm system. "We don't know," Garrison replied. "We discovered it after reports of local villages being terrorized by creatures that were unrecognizable." My mind shot back to the creature that I'd stumbled upon in South Texas. "How did it get to South Texas?" I asked. "Not sure. We think, however, it was an escapee from a research facility operating outside of our military," Calderon replied. "Well, that's not I started to say, as I abruptly stopped and saw something ahead. "Oh, I have something," I said over the radio. My night vision was very accurate at this point, and I could see a figure coming out of the forest within the portal. It looked like a lobster the size of a polar bear. It was moving slowly on multiple legs, and as it got closer, I saw it was more like a scorpion, but upright in stature. It was standing on 2 legs, and giant antennae were feeling about as I kept moving forward. As I got closer, I realized I was on a beach in this other world, and this was some kind of abominable lobster-scorpion creature in front of me. I hit the camera, and it snapped some photos. Then it spun around with lightning speed and shot out sand right at me, and I could see the spray hit the windshield with an audible swish. It retreated into the brush, and then I saw something else coming at me. It was ghastly in appearance and almost undescribable, but, well, I'm going to try. Picture a tortoiseshell, the size of a car but round. Under the shell were 2 eyes on stalks coming out above. The mouth of this thing was more like a cavernous hole with tentacles pointing outward. Each tentacle had a small jaw that looked like a mouth of a cobra. And it was charging now, when I snapped some pictures as it was approaching, or should I say, attacking. And that was my first mistake. It hit my vehicle with tremendous force, and there was smoke immediately coming from it. I didn't see any warning lights though, and I was still in forward motion. The creature rounded me with the speed of a running rhinoceros. I set the targeting switch on and pulled the trigger. I felt a thump as the cannon fired. The creature took the hit head on, and the impact caused it to blow into 2 halves. The explosion sent greenish-white gore and viscera high into the air and onto my windshield. It was smoking, like it was lava or something. I pulled the windshield cleaner, and a jet of water shot out and cleared my viewing window, enough so I could see. There were 3 more of them. "We've got company," I yelled as I saw 2 armored personnel carriers drive past me and into the foray. One of them was being charged by 2 of the creatures at a speed of nearly 30 miles an hour. I locked onto one of them and fired again. An eruption of gore once more shot into the air, as it was wounded but not dead. The remaining one charged me again and collided with tremendous force. I was hurled around inside the cabin, and I felt my arm collide with the inside hull. The pain was intense. My right wrist was broken, at very least. My forehead was also bleeding into my eyes. "I'm hit," I yelled into the radio. "Help is on the way, Stalker 1," the voice responded. I was getting lightheaded and dizzy from apparent blood loss. A red fuel supply light went on. "Something's wrong with my fuel. I think I'm losing fuel," I yelled over the radio. "Fall back, Stalker 1. Fall back." Lieutenant Garrison's voice crackled over the radio. I snapped several more shots as I was trying to get as many picks as I could. One of the personnel carriers was hit, and 2 of the men were killed gruesomely. They were torn to bits in a matter of seconds. There was gore and bones and guts strewn out all over the sand. I continued snapping photos of as much of the carnage as I could get. But I couldn't get the vehicle turned around due to the fuel tank. I started to say a prayer, asking for forgiveness for my sins. I was so sure that this was the end for me. 4 more of the creatures were approaching from the west, as well as 2 of the giant scorpion lobster things. The scorpsters were consuming and scavenging the gore and bones of everything that had been killed. "I'm dead in the water, guys," I said as my consciousness began to fade. "Tell my wife I love her," was the last thing I said as I felt the impact, and everything went black. The next thing I knew, I was in a hospital bed and bandaged up. Doctor came in and said, "You're awake." He was fairly young and a little bit chubby in appearance, but seemed very competent. "I survived?" I asked, laughing. "You were very lucky. They got you just as your vehicle was toppled over," the doctor replied. "Can I talk to Colonel Daltrey?" I asked. "Sure can. He was just outside the room," the doc said. Daltrey walked into the room, looking a bit disheveled and sleep-deprived. "Colonel, I'm so sorry," I began as he held up his hand. "You did just fine, son. You got some good intel out there." "How many did we lose?" "We lost Lyndon and Calderon," he said. "We brought in 2 tanks with incendiary weapon and leveled the whole area. We killed many more of those damn things. We also got shots of several other creatures when we got there with the tanks." I felt a wave of sadness at the news. Calderon was there for me, and he had my back out there. "Well, you have a broken wrist, 3 cracked ribs, and a minor skull fracture," the doctor said. "And a concussion to top it off," added Daltrey. "While the tanks were out there, the medevac team pulled you out of the wreckage. You lost a lot of blood, but your pulse was steady." My pain wasn't bad due to a morphine drip at my disposal. I had the dark shades on as well to protect my eyes. "We've instructed and prescribed a modified version of Morphox called Morphinex," the doctor told me. He said that my eyes would return to normal in about a week or so. Well, I was back home and healing quite well from my injuries. My eyesight was almost normal now after a week and a half of being home. I was just coming home from dropping off my truck to get some body and electrical work done. My earnings from the mission had been enough to get my truck decked out with bigger tires and a lift kit. I had a new paint job as well, and still had some left over to put into my always empty savings account. Well, in a while, I'll be back to work delivering those pizzas for all those hungry customers. After all, life goes on. And so do I. And so once again, we reach the end of tonight's podcast. My thanks as always to the authors of those wonderful stories, and to you for taking the time to listen. Now, I'd ask one small favor of you. Wherever you get your podcast from, please write a few nice words and leave a 5-star review, as it really helps the podcast. That's it for this week, but I'll be back again same time, same place, and I do so hope you'll join me once more. Until next time, sweet dreams and bye-bye.